Melissa,
Sarah.
what are we reading today?
We're reading The Wedding People by Alison Espach.
Excellent. Let's do this. Melissa, this book took me a little bit by surprise as a choice of yours. I really wasn't expecting to see you pick this for this particular episode. So can you tell me how you came to chose this book?
I can. Yes, I'm not surprised that you're surprised, especially given that I only really confirmed it within the last 24 hours. I've actually been reading a fair amount over the last several weeks. We've been doing a lot of trips across the island from Corner Brook to St. John's, and that's an 8-hour drive in each direction. So I'm cruising through a lot of material. But there's nothing really that I've been reading that's like really sparked me in a way that I couldn't wait to talk about it on the podcast. So I had this book because someone loaned it to me. And on Friday night, I was like, okay, this recording date is creeping up on me. I can't escape it. I need to come up with something. So I sort of tucked in on Friday night and set to reading. And by Sunday night, I had, completed it. And I was ready to do some talking with you about it.
I'm proud of you, Melissa. I feel like this was a bit of a binge read for you, which is not your typical style. It's definitely more of a Sarah thing to do. You were always hearkening back to our days in the MA program, and I was notorious for binge reading, and then usually binging Doritos while I was reading, and then trying to get a paper written in maybe about a 10-hour period of time right before it was due. So, but you don't do this. Like, you're much better about, kind of planning ahead and, reading. You have a certain pace that you like to read at, and you weren't on a road trip. So how did you manage to fit the reading of this entire book into one weekend?
Yeah, I was definitely channeling you on this, Sarah. And I don't think we necessarily called it like binge reading when we were in grad school. We definitely binge did something else, but probably not reading. We called it cramming, I think, probably more at that time, since it was very studious based. But I actually took advantage of the fact that this was Mother's Day weekend. And one of the gifts from my husband and delightful children was unlimited reading time. So I put my book math to work. We've talked about this before, that I have a very specific pace. I can cover 30 pages an hour. And so I just mapped out how far I needed to be at certain points and calculated my way along. And by 10:30 last night, I had achieved my goal. And it was all thanks to this beautiful Mother's Day gift that I was given. So also, happy belated Mother's Day to you. Now, obviously, I did wish you a happy Mother's Day on the actual day, but were you able to celebrate or receive any book-related joy throughout Mother's Day?
I was, and yes, happy Mother's Day to you as well, formally announced on the podcast. But I did get to do a little bit of reading. Not maybe as much as I would have liked, because I'm on a little bit of a deadline right now. I have a newish library book that I had to request. And I'm about, I would say, like maybe 2/3 of the way through it, but it's due in 2 days. And I was very aware of this throughout the weekend and didn't necessarily have a ton of time. So I tried to do as much reading as I could on Sunday, on Mother's Day, really trying to take advantage of the fact of like, this is my day. And so I might want to read and spend some time, much to my son's chagrin, because despite him being busy with other things, the second he sees me reading a book, he's putting his hand on the book and saying, I don't want you to read that, Mom. But in any case, I did get to read. I am in the process of reading The Mighty Red by Louise Erdrich. And let's hope that I get it done by the deadline as my camera falls over.
Did we just witness an
But yeah,
earthquake in Connecticut?
yes, there's an earthquake here in Northeast Connecticut. But yes, I did get some reading done, and I am sweating if I'm if I'm perfectly honest about it. But I'm thinking about your Mother's Day, and I'm also thinking about your reading on a budget kind of plan for 2025. And Mother's Day might have been a good opportunity for you to maybe request some books as gifts to kind of help you stay on budget. But it sounds like this was a borrowed book. So, can you tell me how this came to be that you came to borrow this book and have it at your fingertips for this quick weekend read?
That's right. I probably should have used it a bit more strategically because I could have got some gifted books in there to keep me on budget. But alas, a borrowed
Hmm.
book is also a good way to stay on budget. So this book was actually recommended to me by two separate people and two separate readers whose taste I really trust. And that's only in part due to the fact that they always seem to love the books that I recommend to them. So, that reciprocity should mean something. I too should love the books that they, recommend to me. So, Shanda Slip, great friend of the podcast, she recommended it first, but she had it from the library. And Nicole Bailey, who's also a great supporter of the podcast and show, she owned this book and she allowed me graciously to borrow her copy. And I say graciously because she also loaned me a book, and we've talked about this on the show before. It was an Emily Henry book, and I kept it for so long and didn't read it. She eventually just asked for it back, and I was so embarrassed, like super embarrassed. So when I had this book of hers, I was like, chop, chop, I need to read this. I cannot be humiliated again. And so, again, with the timing of the episode coming up, and I needed to have a book, I was like, okay, I am going to read this book on a deadline over the course of the weekend. So, shortly after she loaned it to me.
Excellent. Well, I have heard of this book. In fact, it has been on my TBR list for both 2024 and 2025, and I have not gotten around to it yet. But bring me in a bit more. Can you give me a summary of the book?
Well, before I jump too far into this summary, I have to admit too that afterwards, again, when you read something in a really condensed amount of time, you don't have that same kind of reflection as you're going through the book. And even though the place itself is described very well in terms of the location and the setting of the book, it was still very imaginary to me while I was reading it. I don't think I was really thinking of this place, Newport, as a real place. And to be fair, a name like Newport does kind of sound like a made up place name. But this is a real place. And it's right in your neighborhood, Sarah. It takes place in Newport, Rhode Island, which I'm pretty sure you lived in Rhode Island after graduate school with Nora, and your
Did.
mother-in-law
Mhm.
currently lives in Rhode Island. So I don't know, do you have any actual experience with Rhode Island and Newport in particular?
I certainly do. So, Rhode Island is like about maybe like 10, 15 minutes away from where I live. So, we live in the northeast corner of Connecticut. So, we're kind of wedged between Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And so, super common for us to go to Rhode Island, just to even go to dinner, like that kind of thing. And growing up, I always went to the beach in Rhode Island. That was the beach I went to. Of course, like you said, my mother in law lives in Rhode Island. I lived in Rhode Island for about 2 years. And I have a really long history with Newport, Rhode Island in particular. When I was a kid, probably from ages, say, like 11 or 12 to 14, a very good friend of mine, Sarah Dodge, her family had a timeshare condo in Newport, Rhode Island, right on the water, really beautiful. And every Christmas, they would get it between Christmas and New Year's. And so there were several years in a row where I would go and I would stay, if not for the whole week, at least several days. And it was so magical. There often was snow. Downtown Newport is just super, super charming. It is right on the water. And so I have all these like really warm, fuzzy memories from my childhood of going to Newport. Newport is also known for their Gilded Age mansions. So Newport was essentially like the kind of summer vacation place for all of the wealthy New York families, like the Astors and the Vanderbilts. And so I, during those Christmas vacations and even for field trips, would go to some of these Gilded Age mansions. And then Newport is also known for the Cliff Walk, which is absolutely gorgeous. And it basically skirts along the coast where all of these mansions are located. So on one side, you've got these huge, beautiful homes. And then on the other side, you have the ocean, and there's wild roses that grow. I mean, it's breathtaking. And I have this very specific, very happy memory with two very good friends in the summer of, I think it was maybe 2012, of walking on the cliff walk an August day, and just it was like one of my happiest memories. And then I celebrated my 28th birthday in Newport, and then most recently I was a guest at a very swanky wedding that was held on the campus of Salve Regina University, which is located in Newport. And this particular wedding was actually in a Gilded Age mansion that is now a part of the campus. Super beautiful. And I definitely took advantage and took a lot of photos at that wedding. So, that in a very large nutshell is my association with Newport.
That's amazing. And obviously, the wedding connection makes perfect sense. Like, I can totally
Yeah.
see how this would be a common sort of like, I guess, destination wedding to some extent. But with all of this in mind, too, I am really going to do my best to be spoiler free in this episode, because I actually feel like I know you want to read it. It's on the TBR, but like, I think it'll be better for you to read it without any spoilers. So I am going to do my best. But with that in
Thank
mind,
you.
I am going to try to give a bit of a summary, loose as it will be. But I do have to point out, it felt a little bit funny to me that this book is, very focused on a wedding, much like Piglet was, which we've talked about here and recently. And it's also set very prominently in a hotel, which is a lot like All Fours, which we have talked about extensively, both on and off the podcast. So I'm like, what a strange overlap for this book to have kind of those
Yeah.
two things playing into the setting. But in any case, the book is set in Rhode Island, obviously. So it's told from the perspective of Phoebe, who goes to the Cornwall Inn with the intention of ending her life. This hotel was a place she had dreamed of going, sort of like a bucket list destination for her. She'd never had the opportunity, but she really felt like this was the setting at which she wished to end her life. When she arrives, she realizes she is the only guest in the entire hotel who is not affiliated to a wedding that is happening there. She's the only person who is not there to attend the wedding of Lila and Gary. So Phoebe ends up meeting Lila almost immediately upon checking in. And when Lila finds out that Phoebe is not affiliated to the wedding, she's very upset about it. And when she finds out what Phoebe's actual intentions are at the hotel, Lila is very, very upset about it. And she basically just tells her, like, no, I have been planning this wedding for 2 years. I have planned everything down to the T. You being here, for one, and you being here for the reason that you've told me, for two, is not part of that plan. And so it's just not happening. And she basically tells her that point blank. And although Phoebe, doesn't necessarily oblige Lila right away in that moment of them meeting and having this conversation, I think it'll come as no surprise that, Lila's plans, Phoebe's plans do change rather quickly. And in fact, Phoebe goes on a journey of self-discovery, perhaps self-rediscovery. And it will also come as no surprise that Phoebe does fall in love.
Hmm. Well, what a really almost dark thing though to kind of set as your, beginning part of a book with this idea that this woman Phoebe is going and she has this intention of ending her life. So what brought her to this point of darkness in her life?
So Phoebe is going through a lot of struggles in her life. She has struggled with infertility. She's at a really difficult and challenging point in her career. Her husband, she's found out that he has cheated on her with her friend and has now left her for that friend. And her cat has died. Just to sort of top it all off, that's also what has happened. And it's also worth pointing out that the book is set sort of on like the outer edge of the pandemic. So this is why Lila's been planning this wedding for so long, because it kept getting delayed and delayed throughout the pandemic. But also it really underscores the fact that Phoebe has been alone for a prolonged amount of time. And she's been in a deep state of sadness, but also a deep state of loneliness for a long time. So it's interesting because it does certainly start in a pretty dark kind of macabre way, and that tone is established. But I think the author does a good job of kind of balancing it in the sense that we're concerned for Phoebe, but we also have a lot of faith that things are going to turn out okay for her.
And I feel like there's such a juxtaposition between, how we're being introduced to Phoebe and then how we're being introduced to Lila. And I had to laugh a little when you were explaining how when Lila gets wind of Phoebe's plan, she's like, this will not do. This is not part of my plan. This 2-year long effort I have made to plan this, what I would imagine, very expensive wedding. And I feel like it's such a kind of almost stereotypical like bridezilla moment that she's like, this will not happen. I'm going to have the perfect wedding. And yeah, it does seem like it sets them as opposites. Is that accurate? Are they kind of two opposite sides of a spectrum?
Yeah, I definitely think they give off sort of opposing energies, right? Like what you see in Lila is what you don't see in Phoebe, and vice versa, sort of thing. And Lila's sort of exactly what you would expect. She's your typical kind of like spoiled rich girl. She's used to getting what she wants. She's used to measuring success through dollar signs. And she's the type of person for whom like outward appearance is definitely very important. And that's clearly not what Phoebe is all about. But it's interesting because Phoebe does see herself in Lila in some respects. And in fact, I found that kind of pervasive throughout the book in terms of how a lot of the characters interacted with one another. That they were always very quick to find faults in each other, but they found faults that were their own. They were able to identify their own faults in other people, but it would take them a little bit of time to realize that what they were criticizing in that other person was something that they were also really guilty of. So it was always interesting how they would identify this fault in a person and then even not only be critical of it, but have like solutions for how they should not be that way. And then as things would sort of evolve, they would realize, oh, that's really advice that I should be giving myself, sort of thing. So I liked how that was how a lot of the characters sort of played with one another. And one of the ways it was presented was in sort of this like kind of Dickensian way, in that Phoebe was encountering sort of herself of the past and herself of the present and herself of the future, or sort of permeations of herself at each of those times. And that was kind of how she was able to carry on throughout this journey of self-discovery. I feel like if I had to like distill the book down to one message, or at least the message that spoke to me the most, was that it was this idea of know thyself, right? Like figure yourself out, and then to know thyself, and then as a result of that, to love thyself, if that makes sense. Like I think they were really emphasizing this point of you need to put yourself first, and then you're able to kind of bring others into your life and into your sort of orbit in a more meaningful way. So it was really nice to see Phoebe take that journey.
Hmm. And I feel like often, I feel like I've heard this idea of like often when we're triggered by someone or we don't like someone, sometimes it's it's because we see elements of ourselves in that other person. That's what's triggering ourselves. The thing that I don't like about myself, I see in this person, and that just it rubs you the wrong way. And so, what an interesting way. And I think we've talked about this before. This idea of the setting of a wedding and all the different types of personalities and also the different age ranges. And so I can see how that would have been a really great way to show this character of Phoebe's journey and being able to identify parts of herself in different stages of life and to reconcile those parts and make peace with them and to love herself before she can, kind of move on with her life. So, were you rooting for Phoebe throughout the entire book? Was she a likable character?
Well, I mean, I try to like people in general, but sort of. So remember how I said that Phoebe falls in love as part of the
Mhm.
book, and it's obviously a relatively, important part of the book. The guy that she's falling in love with is actually the groom. So that was like, again, I don't want to give out any spoilers here because I do feel like, in the same way that I read Carly Fortune's This Summer Will Be Different when I was in PEI and it's set in PEI, I feel like this is going to be your version of that this summer to, like, go on a day trip to Rhode Island and read this book set in Rhode Island. So I'm going to be cautious around how I explain this, but she falls in love with what has now become her friend's fiance, soon to be husband. So I get it that they're sort of a friendship of convenience, right? They're not lifelong friends, and now she's here to be in the wedding. They met spontaneously at this wedding, and through a variety of circumstances, Phoebe even becomes the maid of honor at this thing. So she's pretty invested in the wedding as an event, we'll say. And I think it's important to note, too, that Lila ultimately saves Phoebe's life, right? She does it in a very sort of abrupt, no nonsense, and what could be received as sort of selfish way. But it is her manner and it is the care that she shows to Phoebe that ultimately keeps her, alive at that point. Now, how it all shakes out, you might have to read it a couple of times to see how the kindness is displayed. But, Phoebe does survive the night that she did not intend to survive. So the idea that Phoebe is at this place in such a deep state of despair and loneliness because her husband cheated on her with her friend, Phoebe's not super likable in the sense that now suddenly she is really interested in her new friend Lila's fiance. That doesn't really bode well for how I received her as a character. Now, don't get me wrong, Gary's not innocent in this either. But also, I feel like the writer really wanted to absolve them of this by sort of presenting very clearly that they're not a great match for one another. But I still don't think, it still got in the way of me, liking Phoebe, knowing that she was interested in maybe getting in the way of this $1 million wedding 2 days before they're intended to tie the knot.
Oh my. Yeah, that is that's a little bit tough. I could see how it might be hard to like her throughout the entire book. But I don't know, and it, maybe in some way, does it give her some different perspective as to maybe her former husband and former best friend and the way that they got together and how love can be a little bit more complicated than, what meets the eye? I don't know.
I don't know either. And, this won't be a spoiler, but it is a little bit of kind of like an oh moment in the book that her ex-husband does turn up at the Cornwall Inn. And she does have a little bit more sympathy for him, but I don't think it's for that reason. I think it's just part of her
Mhm.
growth and the fact that she's changing, that and having this sort of new version of herself or building up this new version of herself, that I think she sort of believes some of what he feeds to her, thinking, well, if I'm so convinced that I can change, why would I be so dismissive of the notion that he has also changed? I think it's more just the fact that it's trying to show that people make bad decisions sometimes. And sometimes when
Yeah.
it comes to love, we can have blinders on, and that we don't always make the best choices or the right choices at the right times, and that there's sort of there's possible scenarios in which you end up with the wrong person, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the opportunity to right that wrong. That might be
Right.
sort of the redemption there for Phoebe and how she's kind of intruding in this relationship of Gary and Lila's. But again, there's a lot of messiness in Gary and Lila's relationship too. So, there's that happening as well. I'm starting to retract because I don't want to spoil.
Okay, no spoilers. But I do want to go back to this idea of love. And you made a comparison to Carly Fortune's book that you had read last summer. Um, and, I know you liked it, but I don't know that you really loved it, if I remember correctly. Um, this book, in the way that you're kind of describing it, has like a little bit of a romancy sounding vibe in the same way that maybe like a Carly Fortune or an Abby Jimenez book might be. But is there anything in The Wedding People that sets it apart from, your average romance kind of book?
Yeah, it's funny because I think about those types of books and when they sort of introduce these plot twists. And I swear,
Mhm.
like if you held all those books up, like and you stacked them one beside the other, you could probably pinpoint, like at page this, there'll be this type of plot twist, and at page that, it'll be that type of plot twist. Like they really do follow a really obvious formula and template for sure. So this book I definitely would put in the category with like those authors that you mentioned in that style of book. I think the thing that makes this one stand out a little bit is that, Alison Espach is writing for the English major chick lit for sure. So Phoebe, the character, is a Victorianist. So she's a professor of 19th century fiction, and she's always seeing things through that lens. So she's referencing, not only just being in this really fancy environment and her desire to be at the Cornwall Inn, she's outwardly referencing books like Pride and Prejudice, Great Expectations, Mrs. Dalloway. She's talking about the Bronte sisters. Like, she really wants those Victorian vibes to be there. And so if you've never read those books and you're not familiar with those authors, it doesn't detract from the book necessarily, it doesn't make it, unreadable or incomprehensible, but there's a lot more layers that are there for the folks that will pick up on them. Because in addition to just like the overt references to those books from that time period, there's just also that like Victorian vibes that are happening, right? Like you can see the themes of those books happening. So, I mean, you've got the drama, you've got the dead mothers, the fancy parties. So I feel like in addition to it being that sort of formulaic style that we were talking about, there is just that little bit more to this one that kind of elevates it a bit.
I love that one of those reference points is dead mothers. Do you want to elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the best theme for me to have been reading on Mother's Day upon reflection, but again, it was a product of circumstance that I was reading this book, and it could have been worse, but there are definitely dead mothers involved. And actually, I think it's a good opportunity for me to read a little passage because I do actually think the writing is strong too. Like, I think the prose is good. It's not Victorian literary fiction, but it's good too. And it's interesting that you brought up about the cliff walk because this part that I want to read is actually it happens on that on the cliff walk. So you'll be able to visualize it, and now from you having described it more, so too will our listeners. So full disclosure, I'm going to read a section. I'm going to skip part in the middle and then jump forward, sort of like an abridged thing, and then I'll just give like a brief summary of what happened in the part that I skipped. Okay, you ready for this?
I'm always ready.
All right, buckle up. On the cliff walk, there are no people out yet, just someone's yellow dog milling around the 40 steps entrance, though she doesn't see anyone connected to the dog. She starts to walk faster, which tricks the dog into thinking it's a competition, and that's how she starts racing this random dog on the cliff walk. I will get a dog, she thinks. No offense to Harry. That's the dead cat, by the way. No offense to Harry, but the dog will go walking with her in the morning. The dog will keep her out in the world. And it feels amazing to just decide something like that, like I will get a dog. The dog slows to a happy trot 2 steps ahead of her. Together they pass signs telling them to stay on the path. But there are thin dirt trails made by those who did not listen, like the dog, who starts walking down to the rocks. High risk of injury The sign warns, complete with a helpful picture of a man falling off to his death. Yet Phoebe follows because people, like dogs and the fishermen down below, will do anything to get closer to the water. So I'm skipping. She wants to see Edith Wharton's house before the bridal brunch. She says goodbye, pats the dog on the head, climbs back up the rocks. On the way, Phoebe slips, falls, scrapes her knee, but does not slide into the water like the little man on the warning sign. She always had the feeling that it was very, very dangerous to live even one day, Wolfe wrote. And it's true. How easy to be dead, how lucky to be alive, even for just one day. Charlotte Bronte's father understood this. The man had lost every single one of his children except for Charlotte, which is why he repeatedly turned down her final suitor. He worried marriage and the childbirth that followed marriage would kill her, and 1 year later it did. But Phoebe has made it out alive. She's back up on the path. Nothing has destroyed Phoebe. She feels very aware of this as she continues walking. And I just loved that she's celebrating her resilience there. It's like she recognizes some of her faults. And in the section that I skipped, she talks about her experiences with her father, and her mother has passed away, so her father, who raised her as a single parent, and also with her ex-husband, and how their behaviors sometimes forced her to second guess herself or not feel confident or not believe in herself. And this idea that she can recognize that and she knows that's part of her, but that she can overcome it, or she can reimagine what it means as part of her identity. And I really liked how that kind of played out on that cliff walk, that she was willing to see the opportunities in her weaknesses as opposed to just kind of wallow in them.
Yeah. And because I know the cliff walk, I've walked the cliff walk, I have such a clear image of what that looked like. And I don't know if this is going to be like a little bit of a reach, but yeah, as you were reading, I just kept thinking about a place like Newport, especially for someone who's into Victorian literature. And, I feel like a lot of those authors, thinking about the Bronte sisters, um, Edith Wharton, like there's a lot of kind of like biographical tragedy, and even in the works that they created, and thinking about those characters and those journeys, and in a place like Newport being so steeped in a specific kind of history, and having that on one side of you, and then having this ocean, and a treacherous ocean, but it is so beautiful, and to be able to look at both sides of it, like how easy it is to be dead and how beautiful and lucky it is to be alive. Like I really appreciate that, and can see that. And as I had mentioned, like it's funny how like sometimes a random day that does not have any like special thing about it can end up being like such a blissful memory. And I have this one particular memory, which I alluded to before, going on a walk, and it was a gorgeous summer day, and I was with two of my best friends, and it wasn't a super busy day because it can get a little bit crowded on the cliff walk. And we just walked and chatted, and we did the whole cliff walk, and it ends at a beach. And then I don't even think we were wearing bathing suits. We decided that we were just going to go in the water, so we took our shoes off and left our wallets on the beach, and we just like went in the water, and the water was gloriously warm because it was like a late summer day. And I remember having this feeling, and every so often I go back to just randomly of like, how lucky am I to be alive right now, and to be experiencing this, and to be with these people, and to be feeling the water, and to be feeling the sunshine, and where I was at in my life at that point, always something that you're missing or wanting or, worried about. But if in that moment, it didn't matter. And so I don't know, maybe it's a stretch, but I definitely, that passage that you shared really does,
Oh yeah.
speak to me and
And I
feel.
think I can see the connection points for a number of reasons, and one of them being just the presence of the ocean. So like Phoebe is from the Midwest, and I don't know, and again, I'm going to reveal like my lack of knowledge around American geography too, but like she gives the impression that she's maybe even never seen the ocean. And as someone who has spent the majority of my life in, the Atlantic provinces of Canada, the vast majority, in fact, of my life, the idea of not being within a stone's throw of the ocean, I almost can't conceive of it, right? Like it's always there. But there are definitely times when I am on the ocean, like, so close my feet are in it, or I'm swimming in it, or whatever, or you're viewing it from like a mountain or something, and you're just like, wow, this huge entity, like just the possibility of the ocean, but also it's kind of intimidating, and it's beautiful, but it's scary and it's terrifying. And there's really something to how we feel when we're around that large body of water and the potential that it has. But it's funny thinking about the book and thinking about the story that you're telling too, because even in that passage, she says, there was nobody out that morning. And you mentioned about how it wasn't crowded. And this idea in the book that we need to exist as solitary beings, but we need to exist in community as well. And it's like we need strength within ourselves, but we get joy from other people. And just that same idea of like, you have that beautiful memory, and as gorgeous as it is, in its own right, it's also because it was shared with two people who are really special to you as well, right? Like, I think the book did a nice job of really reminding you of like, we're not meant to be solitary. And we've talked a lot about books that deal with COVID, right? It's like some books just pretend it did not happen, just completely ignore it, and then some really use it to kind of help illustrate what they're doing. I think that's what this book did, just to sort of be like, these are some of the repercussions of having lived in solitude for so long. Like, it was really painful for Phoebe, and that part of that, rebirth, or like she got some of that energy, I think, because she was drawn to the ocean, and I think the potential there. So yeah, no, I don't think it's a stretch at all. I think it's a beautiful comparison, and there's a strong connection there.
Ah, well, yeah, that was just so lovely even to think about and to talk about. But I think we're getting to that point where I've got to ask the question at hand, and I'm very eager to hear your response. So, Melissa, is The Wedding People by Alison Espach a could read, a should read, or a must read?
Well, I'm going to say that The Wedding People by Alison Espach is a should read. I think it's a romp. It's an ensemble piece with humor, self-reflection, and references to classic Victorian literature. I mean, it is not in itself a piece of classic Victorian literature. I wouldn't put it in that category necessarily, not in my opinion anyway. And it won't necessarily have a long-lasting sort of impact on my life, but it kept me interested, it kept me intrigued, and for those reasons, I am giving The Wedding People by Alison Espach a should read.
Excellent. Well, a should read coming from you is good praise. And we are coming into the warm weather season, and this sounds like a really good kind of maybe vacation read.
Totally.
Not what your experience was, binge reading it in one Mother's Day weekend, but yeah, I think I'll definitely pick it up and maybe head to the cliff walk and give it a read
Oh,
and go from
absolutely.
there. But
If I can
yeah,
read it in 3 days, you'll read it in like an afternoon.
yeah,
And I can't wait to hear what you think of it. We'll have a great chat together after that, I'm sure.
we always do, Melissa. Well,
True.
thank you for this.
You too. Bye for now.
Bye.